Good evening, everyone, and thanks for being here. I'm Dave Filipi, the Director of Film and Video at the Wexner Center for the Arts. And this evening's program, this evening's conversation, is being videotaped. And to make that video as accessible as possible for as many people as possible, I'm going to provide visual descriptions of Jeff and me. I am, why am I looking at my notes? I'm a white middle-aged man with brownish gray hair. I'm wearing a navy blue sweater and tan pants, and Jeff is a middle-aged man as well, with dark curly hair with some gray in it, and black pants and a black t-shirt and a light blue jean jacket, and we are sitting on a stage in our auditorium in two chairs next to each other. Tonight's conversation is part of the 7th annual Cartoon Crossroads Columbus Festival taking place around the city this weekend. It's taking place at venues including the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum, CCAD, the Columbus Museum of Art, and the main library downtown. And the Wex is honored to be a host venue for CXC once again. And to get a full schedule of the weekend's events, please visit cartooncrossroadscolumbus.org for the full lineup. Jeff is one of the pioneers in the world of comic book self-publishing, and his company, Cartoon Books, founded with his wife, Vijaya Iyer, is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. He is the creator of one of the most popular self-published comic books ever, Bone, which has been translated into more than 20 languages, and it's probably closer to 30, isn't it?
35, 40?
Yeah, a lot. And it's being made into an animated series for Netflix. His other books include Wrestle, Little Mouse, a Shazam series for DC Comics, and more. And he has just released his new book, Tuki, which we'll be discussing tonight. In 2007, the Wexner Center hosted the first solo exhibition of his artwork, Jeff Smith, Bone and Beyond, which I co-curated with Lucy Shelton Caswell, the founding curator of the Billy Ireland, and we have the catalog for sale in the store if you're interested. He has won many, many Eisners, many, many Harvey Awards, and is beloved by parents, teachers, and librarians around the world for encouraging young people to read. Please welcome Jeff Smith.
Thanks, man. And I want to say thank you to the Wexner Center for working with CXC once again and hosting many events. You're one of our main pillars of CXC.
Well,
so that's
I think
great.
I speak for everyone at the Wexner Center. We're really thrilled to do it, and we can't wait till things get a little bit closer back to normal.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah,
Thank you for risking your lives for comic books.
So Jeff, in the intro I mentioned that this is the 30th anniversary of Cartoon Books.
And of Bone number 1.
And of Bone number 1. And if you could, maybe just talk about that moment where you made the leap from, figuring out what you were going to do with Bone to forming Cartoon Books and kind of being part of this new self-publishing movement.
I was trying to sell Bone as a comic strip, and I've told this story many times, so I'll try to shorten it. But I was really discouraged. I would show it or mail it to syndicates in New York City, like King Features or Tribune Media or Universal Press, and I would get rejection letters, except they would encourage me to keep trying. And actually, eventually, King Features and Tribune Media actually brought me out to New York, and but still just kept kind of just dragging me on. So I was like I spent months just doing batches of comics over and over and over again and sending them to both, and they would just say, they would make really silly little changes, and I was getting very discouraged. And one of the problems was my hero is Walt Kelly, who there's a magnificent, I don't know which direction I'm in, we're down in the bunker here, but over across the way at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum, there's a Walt Kelly show that's just magnificent. I just saw it for the first time tonight. But Walt Kelly was my hero, and Walt Kelly owned the copyright of his strip. At the end of every strip, whatever year it was, there would be a little box with a Circle C copyright 1957 Walt Kelly or whatever. So I was like, I got to own my own comic. That was really important to me. My hero owned it. I'm going to own it. But when I would talk to the syndicates, that was a real problem. That was actually a deal killer. That was, you did it. Charles Schultz didn't own his copy. He did not own the copyright on Peanuts. Calvin Hobbes did not own the copyright on
Bill Watterson.
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah, right. The other way around. So that was a deal killer. I actually think that worked out good for me in the long run. But for this story, this was around 1986 when I was starting to get very discouraged and was about to give up on the comic strip, and I didn't know what to do with Bone. I had this Bone story I wanted to do, and I saw an article in the Dispatch about some of these new graphic novels like Mouse, but specifically the one that caught my eye was Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. He did a 4-issue miniseries, which turned into like one story, and it was about Batman after he had retired and disappeared and nobody'd seen him for a while, but he comes back. But it wasn't so much Batman that excited me as the way he told this story. It was, he dispensed with the little caption balloon that says, "Meanwhile," in Commissioner Gordon's office. He would just cut to Commissioner Gordon's office, like you would in a film. You know, or the way you would in a dream. You would just go to the next place. You don't have to write it. You show it. And there are many things like that that really got me interested in the comic book canvas, as opposed to the 4 little squares or 3 little squares of a newspaper strip. And while I was so I went to the comic book store to get the book, and obviously I read it. But while I was there, I saw all these other comics. There was Love and Rockets by the Hernandez brothers. Dan Clowes was doing 8-Ball. Dave Sim was doing Cerebus. There was just a slew of these comic books that were done with color covers but black and white interiors. Really good artwork. I mean, some of this artwork some of it was crazy. Peter Baggs people totally belonged in Mad Magazine, but it was good. And Jaime Hernandez is still probably one of the best artists in comics. Have you seen his new book about the?
No.
I'm sorry. His new book, I'm so excited about Jaime Hernandez. His new book is these drawings he's been doing for like 20 years, but he wasn't ever planning on doing anything with them. He's a real nut for female wrestlers. And the cover of the book is just this one woman wrestler pulling another one, about to throw into the ropes. But oh my God, the action and the weight and it's so good. It's so good. So this is one of the guys I'm looking at in 1986, looking at his book, and I'm picking it up, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, what's going on here? There was all the regular comic books were already there too, Batman and Spider-Man and X-Men and all that. But I didn't really like that, except for this one I specifically went there for. So to shorten the story up, I thought about it for a second, went to Vijaya, and I said, I think I owned an animation studio at the time, and it had its ups and downs, but we were actually in an up place, so it was relatively successful. And I said to Vijaya, I want to sell the animation studio to my partners and be part of this renaissance in the underground comics scene that I'm witnessing. And I give Vijaya credit for not just punching me or something or walking out on me, but Vijaya obviously likes cartoons and helped me. But that was the moment. That was really the moment. It took a while to really figure it out and make it happen, but that was the moment, was that finding a comic book store and going for it.
And then just maybe very briefly, because maybe not everyone knows everything about the way, like the industry as a whole works. What are some hurdles self-publishing as opposed to, being attached to a big company?
Well, for one thing, you don't have the big company doing everything for you. Mm. So in the beginning, it was really just Vijaya and I, and we had to do everything from, build some kind of a solicitation or some kind of an ad and get it into a catalog. We had to figure out how do comic books get into comic book stores. Mm-hmm. And there at that time was a number of distributors. They would put out a catalog once a month, and then the retailer would buy it. So the trick was to figure out how to get the retailer to buy it. And we accidentally, a local retailer here in Columbus, liked my first 3 issues and was actually very helpful in pushing them and inviting me to signings. And he said, we're going to go to this retailer summit. That was, I think it was in Wisconsin. It was Capital City Distribution. And he said, you just come with us. And I guess I said, well, I'm a publisher. Vijay and I actually figured out how we could pay for a space and be, actually set up and have a little table. So I took a bunch of my original art of the covers and an easel and some of those big paper clips, and we threw them in the trunk. I threw them in the trunk of this guy's car. We went to Madison and went to the show. And one of the things that worked in my favor is at these shows. This was not a comic convention that's open to the public. It was just retailers from all over the country. People from California, Seattle, Chicago, Atlanta. They were all the comic book store owners were there. And the weird thing about the comic book industry to this day is that they buy comic books and they're not returnable. They buy them, they get a really deep discount, but if they don't sell them, they're stuck with them. So they really don't want to buy your stuff, to be honest. If there's any chance, if you're new, if there's any chance that they're going to get stuck with any. So you've got to go to these shows like this and kind of make friends and well, here's the thing. All the other comic book companies like Marvel and DC and even the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that was Tundra, they just had salesmen there or saleswomen, whatever. But there was just reps. Whereas I'm sitting there with my easel with a bunch of original art paper clip to it, and I'm drawing pictures for everybody of my characters. And all of a sudden, I've got like a little crowd around of retailers around, and other retailers are walking by, and they see a crowd. They come over and look, and I'm drawing them pictures, and then go in after this thing closes down. We're all in this one hotel. I'm hanging out in the bar. All of a sudden, Jim Hanley from Jim Hanley's Universe in New York City, one of the biggest stores in the world, he's buying me a beer. And then he's calling somebody over. Hey, Roy Root from Berkeley, you got to check out this guy. You're going to like this. And that was a big part of it was just getting to know everybody and kind of figure out how it actually works.
Mm-hmm. And now you have a Netflix series coming up.
Yes, that was a big jump, but yes. I personally, skipping those 30 years, there was good stuff. There was really good stuff in the 30 years.
Well, one thing, you've obviously talked a lot about Bone over the years, but I would like you to talk. One thing that I'm really interested in your work is talking to you about your different influences, and not just artistic influences, but for the stories and where they come from, and maybe your 3 major works, Bone, Razzle, and now Tuki. If you could talk a little bit about where those stories are grounded. For example, I know Old Man's Cave and in the Hocking Hills is in Bone and things like that. What were some of the things that you maybe had been reading or that you grew up with that had a big impact on Bone to start with?
Yeah, Bone was a sort of a mashup of a few different things that really were important to me and really, make me get up in the morning. And that's comic strips, adventure stories, which were like Tarzan or Conan, or I'm going to talk about when I was a kid, Batman, and also mythology like the epics. I loved Le Morte d'Arthur. It was just an intense King Arthur story that's really pulls you in. The Iliad and the Odyssey. So by the time I was like a senior in high school and getting into college, I was really starting to like those big classics, those big stories. So that was sort of what Bone was. I wanted to do my little comic strip characters, the Bones, and just throw them into this big epic story. That's Bone, and then Razzle was that was more like I love noir.
Well, for a second, just pause for a second on Rassel, because I think one thing that's so interesting with especially Rassel and now Tuki is the amount of research that you did for certain components of the story, and like Tesla is a character in Rassel, and where did what was the spark that got you started on that story?
As I was wrapping up, not Bone, but was wrapping up the Shazam book I was working on, The Monster Society of Evil, and I was at the final stages, and I was just inking the last few chapters, and I started watching Humphrey Bogart movies, film noir, or noir, and was really getting into it, and I was really enjoying the tropes of somebody who's standing there and like the shadow just cuts right across their face, things like that. The fact that you're always in the pocket of the protagonist. You don't know anything he doesn't know. I thought that was very interesting, and it's sort of a first-person story, but I just found that interesting. Tesla came in very late at the end. What I wanted to do is I wanted to do a noir science fiction story, because the initial idea for it was actually parallel universes. I don't know, had discovered that somewhere and was intrigued by the idea of what if you found yourself in this parallel universe that was so similar, but like maybe your wife was married to someone else, or your life just had turned out differently, for better or for worse. And I was intrigued by that. I didn't exactly with the direction I went, but now I had noir and I had parallel universes, and a story was starting to coming together. And I had the triangle. You had the protagonist, you had the villain, and you had the femme fatale. And there was also a prostitute with a heart of gold. I think she was in there too. And then I got to throw in my crazy fantasy kind of stuff once I got into the parallel universes. But I was having trouble. I knew that the last scene, I knew what it was. I knew that there was going to be a noir. One of the things about noir is that you kind of get yourself in a jam, and it's really raw at the end. And I wanted the bad guy and Rassel to like have a really just no guns, just fists out in the middle of the desert, and it was just going to be sand and blood. But I didn't know what they were fighting about. I didn't have the Maltese Falcon. I needed that the hook to put the whole thing on. And a friend of mine I was talking to about the story, well, she suggested you need to go read up about the Philadelphia experiment and follow the rabbit down the hole with Tesla. And she turned me onto that. And once I did that, oh my goodness, all these elements of this story that I had come up with that I didn't know how to tie together, whoomp, went right together. It was amazing. Every conspiracy theory that people have in America, probably even QAnon, all can be tied back to Tesla. I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing rabbit hole. So then once I got into Tesla, I found that Tesla made a lot of. He was a brilliant man, but he made a lot of poor choices that kind of doomed him in the end. And I felt like that paralleled Rassel's story. So I introduced that element without not really making him a character like he walks around and talks, but more like just it's what's ruminating in Rassel's head. His name's Rob in the story. Rassel stands for Romance at the Speed of Light.
Well, so just to, you mentioned you introduced or Tesla tied things together kind of late in the process. When you are working on an extended story like that, how do you build in for that flexibility? Is it just purely accidental, and maybe you have to go back and rework some things that happened 50 pages ago?
Well, at the point that I'm talking about, I had not started drawing or anything like that. One of my rules of thumb is to always figure out the ending before you start, and then you can work toward it. And that way, when you get there, you look really smart. So figure out the ending, and I actually I really had so much I could see in my mind how this was going to work, and I wanted it to take place in south southwest part of America, and Vijaya's brother was living in Tucson, which is surrounded by what's the name of that desert? The Sonoran Desert. So I actually went and stayed with him for like 2 weeks, and he would get up and go to work, and I would drive out to the national park, and I would just walk out into the saguaro cactus, those big ones that you'd see in the cowboy movies, and I mean just thousands and thousands of them, and there's nothing out there. It's so quiet, and it's hot. It's 111 degrees. It's just everything is still, and there's nothing. There's not even, you don't even hear insects or anything. And I felt like everything in my head came out. And the whole ending of the story just kind of came together. One of the elements of the Tesla story, and that keeps it so interesting, is that the day before he died, or the morning after he died, the day before how do I say this? He was supposed to go to the White House, but he died mysteriously or quickly the night before. And what he was going there to do, this was at the end of World War II, and he was quite upset that Serbia was under attack, or the Nazis were getting close. So he invented the death ray. He invented a proton charged thing, particle accelerator or something crazy, and he started telling he wanted the government to build it, and the government was kind of so he went to our allies, which included Russia in World War II. Well, the White House went, okay, you come talk to us. So he was set to talk to him on whatever date that was, but the night before he died, and apparently the government went into his rooms and took everything, all the paperwork and everything. So a big part of the Tesla legend is that his diaries, his journals are missing, and nobody knows. And the legends are that maybe they're buried somewhere in Wright Pat, which was the Area 51 of its day, and you picture something like Indiana Jones, right?
Yeah.
The big endless warehouse. So in my story, he's working on some Tesla-type technology, and he goes to visit Wright Pat, and some old guy down in the catacombs approaches him and gives him a package, and it's wrapped up in newspaper and twine, just like the Maltese Falcon, and it's Tesla's lost journals, and it's the key he's been looking for, he thinks, to be able to go from point A to point B behind enemy lines. And he thinks he can do this for individual soldiers. Well, he takes it out one night without permission to test it. And it takes him 3 weeks to realize he's in another universe. He's actually jumped it. And I don't know, how, am I getting too in the weeds here? Stop me. This is your job to keep control of this thing. There's actual parts of Tesla's theories that actually lean into this. And also, Einstein wrote in 1928 a unified field theory that we never hear about because he abandoned it because everybody laughed at it, including him. But in it, the only way he could make this unified field theory work in 1928 was to insert a placeholder, a mathematical placeholder, that basically was a tiny spiral alternate universe. And that made the whole thing work. And I'm like, damn, that fits my story so good. So anyway, that's...
Well, but you kind of in a way answered what I was getting at is I love talking to you about things when they're in process, because you do go down these rabbit holes and you get so enthusiastic about things, and you're doing research, and it's really fun to talk to you when things are in that stage, and that's a nice segue, I guess, to your new book. And well, maybe tell everyone, because maybe not everyone has had a chance to look at what the new book is out. In a way, and we can get to this, it's not necessarily a brand new book.
It's pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the great joys of doing comics is doing the research. It's actually my job to get up in the morning, get some coffee, and go sit at the laptop and just explore. And especially like once I got into the Tesla stuff and parallel universes and the physics, it was all crazy. It was just incredible. So I loved doing that. And when I did Bone, Bone was, pre-internet or pre the way we think of it now. You didn't just go Google image and see what everything you wanted to look like. I had Vijaya carried around with her for years when we were moving around. Her Encyclopedia Britannica that she had as a kid. And I used that Encyclopedia Britannica to actually look up what does a horse cart look like? What does the mast look like on a tall sailing ship? And that's how you had to do it. Or go to the library and get reference material out. So I love that. Like As It Bone was a combination of adventure strips and fantasy epics, and Rassel was noir and science fiction and physics. Tuki is this kind of mixture of my lifelong interest in evolution, the human beginnings, and pulp heroes like Doc Savage or Conan, and mystical lost realms. I love that concept. Like even in Tarzan, there would be like the lost land of Opar or whatever. So I wanted to do something like that. And the thing that set it off, that made me want to do it, was I realized there was a point 2 million years ago when, actually, wait, let me tell the story a different way. Vijay and I went with a friend of ours, a couple, Larry Martyr and Corey Martyr. He's the cartoonist that does Bean World, in case anybody knows him. We went to Africa because Corey worked for Abercrombie and Kent, which is a travel agency, and so we were able to get really good deals on the tickets. So we went to Kenya and Tanzania, and a very important stop on this trip for me was Olduvai Gorge. This is the famous archaeological site where the Leakeys worked for decades. And every time, as they went down, they would find fossils and bones of different humans, different species, earlier and earlier evolutionary stages. Like we've all heard of Lucy, the famous Lucy. Well, she was an Australopithecus afarensis. Then there was other versions of the Australopithecines. There was Homo habilis, who was the first tool maker, the first stone chopper, and all these. And while we were at this gorge, this site in Africa, I had this almost like this vision. I was like down in the gorge, and I was standing there, and I remember looking up the wall of the dig, and above it were all these palm trees just kind of swaying in the wind. And I had this vision. I could see all these multiple species of humans kind of walking around together and interacting almost like it was a market or something. And there probably was something there. That's why all these people were there. There probably was a stone-making pit or something. And what it turned, then I found out 2 million years ago, there was a point when that could have happened. A lot of these species still were existing and hanging around out at the same time, and then this was the kicker. Enter this period where multiple human species are already alive, but suffering because there was a huge drought. Climate change was really bad even back then. Enter this scene is Homo erectus, our direct ancestor, and he's the one who brought fire. So this story, Tuki, is really about the birth of fire. And so not only do you have all these species still hanging around, you've got fire in the equation. I thought, what are the other humans thinking about us using fire? They must have rejected it or something. So then I got this idea that maybe one of the species could be like ISIS. They hate anybody that's using fire is blaspheming, and they'll hunt and kill anyone who's found using fire. And then I was like, I am in my mystical lost realm. I am gone, and that's the end of my story. Thank you.
So the story is, um, in the first half of Tuki, in book one, it's 2 books. Um, the, when you mentioned it's kind of a bit of a pulp novel, and it bears similarities to westerns, even a little bit of, where there's this main character who's on a journey, and he starts to meet characters along the way. If you could maybe talk a little bit about how the story came together, and how you settled on some of the key characters and developed, because there's some very strong characters that are introduced in really clever ways that that take the story forward.
Well, a big influence for me, and did inspire some of Tuki, is Kurosawa. I'm a big fan of Yojimbo and Seven Samurai. Seven Samurai might actually be my favorite movie. But the idea of Tuki even looks a little bit like
Toshiro Mifune.
Mifune, yeah. So that idea of starting with the lone wanderer entering a scene and a situation is kind of where I wanted to go to start with. And I originally did Tuki as a webcomic. I think I started in 2014, and I think I did it for about 2 years. About once a week, I'd put up a page or two. And I had this, I thought was a cool idea. I would, instead of doing it like a comic book page, I would do it landscape the way a computer screen is formed, which meant I had to figure out a new way to do my page layouts. And I played around with it. I found some successful ones and some less successful ones, but that was kind of fun. The other idea was, since I'm only going to put up like 1 page a week, in fact, this part of my idea, I was inspired because I was visiting Lucy at the Billy Ireland, and I was back in by her office, and there was like a tray of original pages that was out to be refiled, and on top was this giant Prince Valiant original. And Prince Valiant, I mean, Hal Foster was, they were like posters. They were just huge, and they're just amazing. And I think my memory of this, do you have this Prince Valiant, Lucy? The one where they're like there's like a battle on like a stone bridge? Okay, so that's the one. And it blew my mind. And I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. I'm going to do, each page of Tuki is going to be like a Prince Valiant page, and that you'll just be able to look at that till the next week. So I did that for about 2 years, and I think I probably had 70 to 80 pages. I don't really remember exactly. But I started to think, well, I'm going to reprint these in comic books. Well, I had 2 problems. One, since it was shaped like a comic book, they had to be printed sideways. So you had to hold the book like a calendar and read it like that, and people hated that. But that wasn't really the worst part of it. The worst part of it was, when you read these Prince Valiant pages, they were, each one, was like, wow, but then it didn't really flow to the next one. There was a lot of start and stop as the story went on. Some of them flowed, some of them didn't. And I realized that was a problem. And there was a third thing that made me say, okay, enough, I need to start this over. The children came into the story, and they immediately got me. I mean, I just love these kids. There's these 3 lost children that run across Tuki and kind of like stick to them, and they start traveling together. But I just really wanted to reframe their relationship and explore the kids a little bit more. But I had to set the whole thing aside because I just didn't really know how to approach that. I had a lot of things going on in my life at the time, and one of which was working with Lucy to start up CXC and get this off the ground, which we started, I think 2014 was our first year. So I set Tuki aside, and it was, I started every now and then I would like reread the pages and see what is it, what's missing, how am I going to do this? And I took it to San Diego Comic-Con International. Vijay and I and Tom and Kathleen, who are here, also are helpers. I don't know, our elves. I don't know what that.
Your very valuable staff.
Thank you, our
we go.
very valuable staff. Kathleen's doing like this right now. So we took it there, and we got some interest from some publishers, but nothing that really panned out. And then it was when the shutdown happened, March of 2020. I really didn't have anything going on. I didn't really have anywhere to go, just like everybody else. We were in Key West, so there wasn't the worst thing in the world. But Key West during a pandemic is spooky. There's no cruise ships. There's no boys puking on their girlfriends. It was quiet, and you could hear birds singing. Anyway, I didn't know what to do, and I dug the Tuki out one more time, and this time it happened. I got it. It was just like when I was in the Arizona desert, and I figured out what was going on. I just started writing the pages, and then I started drawing the pages, and pretty soon, really quickly, I had 2 graphic novels. One was done, and the other was about 75% done, and I couldn't believe it. And I liked the story, and Vijaya liked the story, and Tom and Kathleen liked the story, and Lucy read it. Okay, now what do I do? So we thought, we had some friends that were self-publishers back in the 90s, at the same time we were self-publishing Bone, so 30 years ago. And they said, well, what you got to do is you got to go on Kickstarter. So we went on Kickstarter, and it was very successful. People really liked the book, bought a bunch of them. And now we're trying to figure out how you mail thousands of books to each individual person all over the world that wanted them. But we're doing it. You guys have done it. People are actually getting the books now.
So
you're allowed to kick me and just stop me when I go that way.
And we'll take questions from the audience in just a second. But I am interested in, maybe you don't have to discuss every character, but the first character that Tuki meets is kind of the wizard character. I can't remember what his name is off the top of my head. But
he starts calling him Doc after a while.
Yeah, it seems like that character is inspired by somebody or another, maybe some influence from your past. I don't know if
no, I don't think so. He was. I knew Tuki. Obviously, he's our fire starter, and I knew the kids were also going to be Homo erectus. But I also knew that I wanted to have Homo habilis, and that's what Doc is. That's the first person he meets, and okay, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole. Stop me if I'm going too long. Sorry, I don't know why I do this. But okay, so could Tuki talk? Could our ancestors talk 2 million years ago? Because I could do pages and pages of wordless panels. I love doing that. But ultimately, for me, I need to have the characters talk. And I couldn't put dinosaurs in there because that just wasn't real. And I didn't want him to talk if he couldn't really talk. But if you look at the skulls of our ancestors from that period, you can see that they have a very long voice box, larynx, long enough to modulate sound, which is crucial for forming any kind of word or sound like a word. And they also took casts of the insides of their skulls, and in the front, they had Broca's areas. And Broca's area is an important speech center in the human brain. So even if we don't know if he could talk in a way that we would recognize, right? But he was the first one to have the equipment. So I went for it. Because they're always pushing everything back anyway. They're just now saying, oh, well, there were humans in America 13,000 years before we thought they were. They're always pushing stuff back. So I figured, what the heck.
He seems no one will get this reference. He seems very Walter Brennan-ish to me, like this kind of cranky
yeah, he's
sidekick
kind of well, he's a little more neurotic than I think of that character.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's a little bit like Dr. Zaius, but kind of a worrywart.
We can open it up to some questions from the audience. Anyone have a question about bone wrestling?
Afraid to get me started.
Yes, right here.
The one character of yours that has not come up is Thorn.
Ah.
And can you talk about how did Thorn have an influence on Bone?
Oh, you mean the comic strip Thorn? And when I was yeah, so I did the comic strip I did in the Ohio State Lantern was called Thorn. It was a proto Bone strip. It had all the same characters: Grandma Ben, the Red Dragon, the three Bone cousins. It had a huge effect. I mean, first of all, I learned my craft. I learned how to, you draw your artwork a little bit bigger, and then it gets shrunk down about half, and then reprinted in the newspaper. And I learned how fine of a line will survive that process. How detailed or delicate a drawing can I do? I learned that kind of a thing. I learned just the process. I had to learn discipline because I had to have them in order to be in the paper, get them done. But creatively, what I learned when something was funny and when something wasn't, because people at Ohio State would just very quickly write a letter in and say that's a terrible joke. But if they liked it, they liked it. Like the stupid rat creatures joke was from the Lantern strip, and I repeated it almost exactly in the comic books when I did them because that was the joke that everybody told me they liked. So it did have a big effect. And can I jump to Netflix real quick? So Netflix is doing a show. I'm always cautious because I've been burned by Hollywood so many times, but they really are doing some fun stuff. And I can't talk about too much except I want to say I saw some character models just this week. And Thorn looks so beautiful. I actually had a little crush on this drawing, and I was like, okay, that's exactly what we're going to need. So that was very fun.
Yes, sure.
With my own comic work, I find that the real thing is keeping the style consistent, and I always think that's so amazing about your work, and it's easy to take it for granted, like how you're taking like Walt Kelly and throwing it into like Prince Valiant or something, which sounds like it's making it very difficult for you, but somehow it looks like it all belongs there. Yeah. I don't know how the hell you do that.
I don't either. This Tuki is I make it hard on myself for no reason. Like Tuki is has an ensemble cast. The main core group is Tuki, Quarrel, the Australopithecus, Doc, the Homo habilis, and the three kids. So that's 6 main characters that are in every scene. I mean, I don't have to put them in every camera, but they're in every scene. And they're in the jungle. What was I thinking? So it's taking me a little longer to ink the final chapters of the one. A funny thing about the consistency. One is that Scott McCloud pointed out to me something I do to make it harder for myself is each panel, I do it kind of like Doonesbury. Each panel is pretty much the same. So you have to draw the characters in the same pose and they need to be consistent. That's harder to do than just drawing somebody in this panel and the next panel he's like that, because you just jump them. But if you keep them so similar, you don't want to stop the reader's eye from moving. You don't want to stop and go, oh man, his hair looks different there or something like that. So that's one thing.
But you have so many scenes the comic timing is so precise that it's set up by that. Like you're probably your most famous page where Bone is hanging on the branch. It's identical frame, and then boom, the joke, the payoff. And,
right.
I think you do that a lot in your comics.
I do because it's funny, but it's really hard. The other consistency thing I can tell you is that when I said I went and talked to Vijay and said I have this idea. She knew I wanted to do. She knew about Bone obviously because I'd been doing the comic strip for so long. So she knew the characters and all that, and she knew that I had a story and I was getting ready to do it. I told her the whole story. I knew someday that each chapter, each comic book issue would be a chapter. We knew that. Vijay and I both knew that from the beginning. We're sure if it would take 10 years or 20 years. Didn't know that. But I had the ending written. I knew certain tentpole events in the outline I was going to have to hit. But the other thing I knew is that someday somebody's going to be able to sit down with a big fat copy of it and read the whole thing in one weekend. And I needed Phone Bone to look the same on page 1 as he does on page 1343 or whatever. And he doesn't quite, but I really worked at it, and he's pretty close. He's pretty close. Some of the characters went way off model a few times, like King Doc. And Thorn, actually, I got better at drawing her over the 12 years, but wonderfully, that fed into the story because Thorn goes from being kind of a cartoon Disney princess kind of thing to becoming more adult and taking charge of her own life. And it fits that all of a sudden there's details in her ear and the anatomy on her knees is correct and all that kind of stuff. It all worked out.
Other questions? Yes.
I have it in my brain. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
So how long did it take to like make Tuki? Because like I know like with Bone you had it since you were 5, and then Razzle I think ended around like the early 2010s. How long did it take to like develop the story and research for Tuki?
That's a very interesting question. And it wasn't until Tuki that I realized that I do have a pattern that Bone, I've obviously, well, not obviously, but I've drawn the Bone characters since I was very little. And I knew those characters inside and out. But it was really the time period from doing the Lantern strip, which ended in 84 or 85, to when it became published as a comic book 30 years ago this year, 1991. That was a gap of about 6-7 years. I think it's about 6 years. I can't remember the exact number. But during that period, I was trying to sell the comic. I was working on it. I was working on the story, trying to tighten the ending. And it took those 5 or 6 years to really do the work, to get the research done, to make sure that the character arcs all made sense, that the story made sense, and that the ending would be satisfying. Well, Razzle was the same way. I came up with the idea for Razzle way before I finished Bone. I started working on that in like 2000. And in fact, in 2001, I went to visit, it was in New York, and I was visiting with Paul Pope and Frank Miller, and we hung out a lot in the 2000s. And we were at one point I told them this story I had about this parallel universe and this guy who hops back and forth. And they loved the idea. But they was like, well, we want to do science fiction stories too. And all 3 of us were going to do like an anthology of like 3 giant, because Paul Pope used to make these giant oversized comic books. And we were going to do something called Big Big. And all 3 of us were going to do like, tell our science fiction stories. But that never came about. Our schedules never lined up. And by the time Razzle changed completely. It took me from 2000 to 2009, I think, is when I started. So there's a 9-year thing where I was doing deep dives into physics. I mean, string theory. I mean, I probably can't anymore. But if you'd have talked to me right when I was working on Razzle, I could have probably faked you out into thinking I knew something about string theory, or M theory, as some of us call it. Right, Chris? Okay, so Tuki. Tuki was the same thing. I finished Razzle, and I wanted to go right into Tuki. I didn't want to wait. I kind of had an ending I thought was good, and I kind of knew what the story was, and I didn't want to wait. I didn't want to do I did enough research, I thought, which got me all my humans and my timing. But I didn't. I had not done enough research. The whole thing about fire, I didn't know that yet. I didn't know fire happened at 2 million years ago. I just knew that all the people lived there. And I just jumped into it, and I thought, I'll just figure it out. It didn't work. The story did not mesh. And for the reasons I said earlier, I felt like it needed to be started over, and I shelved it. And it was shelved from, 2000, I don't know, remember when I started, 2015 to now. So that's, again, it was 6 years that I then went back and did another deep dive, and that's when I discovered that fire, we first started. You know how they figured out? You want to hear a rabbit hole thing?
Yes.
Okay. Here's how they know that that fire happened 2 million years ago. Because we can look at the fossils of our ancestors and we can see the physiology change. The previous to Erectus, our most direct ancestor, we had guts and a different shape, rib cage and body that had a much larger gut for digesting vegetables, tubers, and raw meat. They needed a lot more real estate for their bowels and stuff. Well, suddenly they don't need that much anymore, and the answer is that they were cooking their meat, and cooking, and because it's a lot more. You can really process all that protein, all the other things they can get from meat to feed their bigger brains, and it's easier to get through, break the bones, to get the marrow, all that kind of stuff. So that's it. They figured it out.
Well,
Boom.
that's a cool part of Tuki too, because it's the story, and then Jeff has all these kind of like extras, if you will, at the talk about the research that you did and a lot of the sources and stuff, which you don't find in every comic book necessarily. Yeah, it's a really cool part of the book. Yes.
It's not.
If you're a self-publisher, who's your editor?
It is true. Team Cartoon Books, Vijaya, Tom, and Kathleen Glowson, Tom Gott, Vijaya Iyer, my wife. They are, yes, applause. They have put up with my nonsense and my delays and everything for 30 years. I mean, these guys have been with me like 25 years. It's pretty impressive. But they are my sounding board. I bounce things off of them. And I test most of my jokes on Vijaya, especially back during the Bone days. And if she laughed, then it was in. If she didn't laugh, it was out. That was it.
You don't send it to anyone else. It's just all internal.
Oh yeah. I had when I worked with DC, they were pretty respectful of me. I did tell them, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna draw out the whole book, and you don't have. And if you want to make changes, then we'll just stop. I said I'll do it, but I mean, if you make me do something I don't want to do, we just won't proceed. And to their credit, they waited. I don't remember if they gave me a little bit of money up front. I don't remember. But I drew, like, penciled, like, really fast thumbnailed comics for 48-page books. And they had, like, 2 really minor changes, and they didn't bother me at all, so I made them, and that was really good.
For Shazam, your Shazam series.
Oh, yeah, Shazam. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Which is a terrific series. Yes.
Can you comment on black and white versus color, since you have books in both styles and even the same book in both styles?
Oh, that is a great question. I did Bone in black and white because back when I was trying to do the comic strips, they were all in black and white 100% all the time. Pogo, Peanuts, everything was in black and white. Pogo was not around anymore, but I think of comics as black and white. And I worked really hard to make it work in black and white. I spent a lot of time making sure to use black to either make things appear very close to the viewer or very, very far away. And I think I figured that out pretty well. But when it came time to publish the books through Scholastic, I think they would have been fine to have them be in color. I mean, to have them be in black and white, because they were selling already around the world. And that was why Scholastic approached us and wanted to publish these books. Scholastic wanted to, in case anybody doesn't know, Scholastic wanted to start a new imprint called Graphics for graphic novels for YA audiences. And they wanted to launch it with Bone. And Bone had just finished its run and was a complete story. So it was actually Art Spiegelman who suggested that they do it in color, because he was actually working with them at the time trying to set up, he wanted to be part of this line. I don't think well, it didn't work out. So I ended up signing with Scholastic, and then eventually he didn't. He and his wife, Francoise Mouly, did make Toon books later. But it was Art Spiegelman who said, let's do Bone in color. It should be in color. And I was like, Art, Mouse is one of the reasons I wanted to do graphic novels. It's one of the reasons I left comic strips. If Mouse is in black and white, why shouldn't Bone be in black and white? And he says, well, Mouse is about war and the Holocaust. It should be in black and white. But Bone is about life, and it won't be finished until it's in color. And I was like, well, okay, I guess Art. We'll give it a try. And we did. And Scholastic, to their credit, allowed Vijay and I at Cartoon Books to continue publishing the big fat 1,300-page black and white version, the original black and white version that we published in 2004. Took off the market for briefly while we launched the Scholastic color books, which were doing great. And then we talked to Scholastic, and they said, we have no real, we're happy with these. We have no interest in the black and white book. Have at it. So they gave the rights to that back to us, and we still to this day publish that big fat brick of a book. I like the black and white. That's where my heart is. That's what I intended. That's what I wanted. But the color's good. I worked on the color with a friend of mine, Steve Hamaker. My mouth is dry. Did we bring water up here?
I think you drank it all.
No. Yeah, I did drink it. And kids love the color. People love the color. So both versions are out there. I prefer the black and white, but I can see that the color's great. Thank you very much. And with Rassel, I thought I was going to like the black and white better than that because it's noir, right? It's a noir book. So I thought, well, we'll do that in color. I mean, in black and white. Well, Steve Hamaker, who colored Bone, wanted to color it. And we wanted to have it out in, he had like this ridiculously small window. He had like 3 months. And we were to color 500 pages. And I said, well, it can't be the same color palette as Bone. That's a lot more cartoony. This has got to be much more real. And he tried for weeks coming up with color palettes, test pages with Rassel, and it just wasn't really working. And it was really time we had to send this to the printer so that we would have it in time for Comic-Con San Diego where we wanted to debut it. Well, at the last minute, he comes up with these set of pages that were so dark and rich and smoky, and it changed the texture of the story of the book. And I was like, all right, man, you got 3 months. He did it. He did it. He stopped talking to me for a while after that. But it is amazing. It is amazing. He did an amazing work. Now that one, I like the color. So we don't even reprint the black and white anymore. We have a paperback version that's in color in 3 volumes, and we have a black and white 1 volume. So I guess I'm either way on that. If it's good color, I like it.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
I know you started out in animation. Do you ever miss that, or does cartooning totally scratch the artistic itch?
I missed the guys and the gang that was always there, my partners, and I missed the camaraderie of people all being there in the same room and playing jokes on each other and shooting Nerf darts at each other, and I miss all that. And I miss the excitement of somebody getting a scene ready to do a pencil test, and he's shooting it, and we all he tells us, and we all run and gather around and watch the drawings move. That never got old. Never got old watching drawings move. But working around the clock to meet a deadline and staring into a light bulb to trace through like 2 or 3 layers of paper, and that was just crazy. That was crazy. It's actually, they don't do that anymore. I've now learned that it's all on Cintiqs now, and then they can kind of trace without looking at a light bulb. So, so I'm looking forward to the Netflix thing, but I am not. I don't want to animate anything. Thank you very much.
Well, if you haven't had a chance to see Tuki yet, I enjoyed reading. I've read book 1 so far. I enjoyed reading it so much. It's a great adventure story, but it's so much fun. There's so much humor in it. The characters are terrific, and yeah, you really nailed it. So congrats. Yeah.
I have seen reviews saying back in form at last or something like that.
Well, it does.
I don't know where I've been, but
It does. It harkens back to Bone a little bit with the amount of humor that's in it, and the comic timing and things like that. So I can kind of see what they're saying in that regard. But
well, good, because I'm having a blast. I
Yeah.
love going there. I love thinking about what it could have been like to be back then. It's very fun.
well, cool. So Jeff is going to be signing in the lobby if you would like to have something. There's some pre-signed books too, but if you'd like to talk to Jeff or have a book signed, he'll be out in the lobby in like 5 minutes. So thank you, Jeff Smith.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming, man.